year-round and on a daily basis through 8 core programs. We offer, for example, the Creative Armenia AGBU Fellowships. We run a residency with the Bohosian Foundation for Armenian artists who go to Brussels for a creative residency. We offer strategic grants for cutting-edge projects. On Monday, actually, we announced a wave of 18 Spark grants, which are going to 18 wonderful creators across all art fields. And we couldn't do any of this without our brilliant artists, without our cultural patrons, and without established artists like Atom and Arsinée, who give so much of their time to mentoring and nurturing and serving on juries and giving back and paying their success forward to new generation of Armenian artists. Today, it's my pleasure to take part in this discussion with 2 towering figures of Armenian culture. Arsinée Khanjian is a globally recognized actress, a conscientious citizen, winner of Canada's top acting honor, and just an absolutely compelling Armenian. Atom Egoyan is a visionary filmmaker who has created an absolutely unique body of work. He's won the Cannes Film Festival, been nominated for an Oscar, but really he has spent his lifetime really accumulating and really bringing his inner life to the world through an incredible body of work. Separately, they are powerful creative forces, and together they've created a new Armenia, as Saroyan would say, an Armenia that is brilliant, conscientious, profound. Atom and Arsinée, thank you for finding each other and for creating that new Armenia and for not only creating excellent art, but becoming founding members of Creative Armenia, and through your work in Armenia and outside of it, perpetuating a new generation of talent. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, as you put it, you said thank you for finding each other. I think I've never heard anyone say that, and that's an interesting way of putting it.
Well, I don't know of any 2 people, to be honest, in the world, maybe like I can think of it, but in the world of Armenian culture who've created an almost like cosmic event of 2 like asteroids clashing or something, really creating something, a very special spark. You're obviously more powerful together than you would be alone. So I'm delighted to have you 2 together on one screen.
Yeah.
Which was a debate, whether or not we should be on 2 separate screens.
Well, we're having trouble, sort of occupying the space. it's too small, it looks like.
Yeah.
But
which is ironic. I mean, I guess.
No, thank you for the introduction, Garin. It's I think I, at least myself, I feel humbled with everything you said, and I just wanted to say that. We never had a specific agenda to sort of accomplish anything other than excellence in what we knew how to do and what we knew we can learn. So we learned from each other, for sure. And I can say in my case, definitely from Atom, but also we learned as we went about with the outside circumstances of everything that was happening around us, with curiosity and a sense of realizing that the world offers so much to learn from, and that you can never get to that point that you can say we learned enough now. So it has been an ongoing journey for both of us. And, if we didn't agree on a lot of things, we agreed on this principle that we had to go on with learning and watching and observing and, sort of absorbing.
Well, I want to get to the root of that, actually. And since we're Armenian, I think we can cut to the chase and get very sentimental and very nostalgic very quickly. And if I can really ask you, and I actually don't know the answer, and I'd like for us to have the space to really ask in any way that you wish to answer it, those first encounters, like between the 2 of you, when you met, I'd really like to know how you viewed each other. Atom, when you viewed Arsinée, or Arsinée, when you found Atom, or where you perceived him as an artist and as an Armenian in both of these senses. What was the impression you got? Like, who was Atom for you, and vice versa,
it's complicated, right? Because okay, I'll give you my history first, and then Arsinée will tell you hers. Or you want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay, I was born in Egypt. My parents were also both born in Egypt. This is a very long story, but I'll try and make it as compressed as possible. So
it's thousands of years old, actually.
My parents are both painters. We're both painters. As young artists, they studied in a workshop in Cairo by a very influential figure there, whose name was Ashot Zorian, who taught that whole generation of Armenian artists. So you have to understand the Armenian community in Egypt was very self-contained. That's important when we talk about Lebanon. So it's very
and pre-genocide,
and it had been there pre-genocide. Except my father's mother was a genocide survivor. We don't know where she was from. We don't know. We know nothing about her except that she met my grandfather, who was from Arabkir, who had escaped right before, who saw it coming. So he had escaped, and he went back and found my grandmother at an orphanage, and they married. So my father's side definitely has that line to genocide. But when my parents moved to Canada, a lot of Armenians left in the early '60s, fearing Nasser, and fearing that it was going to be a hard time for the Armenian community. They made a curious choice. They didn't go to Montreal like all of their family did. They went to the very west coast of Canada, where we were like the only Armenian family in this village, this small town called Victoria. So I was raised in this place where there was no community, there was no church. The closest community was Vancouver, and at the time it was still very small. Priests would come in from Montreal, and there would be, like we'd go there once a year maybe. And my sister's godfather was a prominent figure in that small Armenian community. So we were very detached. When I came to Toronto to study to study international relations, I never studied film at the university. There was an Armenian Student Association, and I suddenly became very involved. It was in the early '80s, and it was at the time of the Armenian Justice Commandos and the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia. That was in full throttle, and we were very involved in that. As the Armenian Student Association, we were like involved to the point where like maybe too involved. So it was a fiery moment, and it was a time of reclaiming stuff that I just didn't know. A lot of history I didn't know. That's where your grandfather's books were really important to me, because I was doing all my studies. I remember I studied international relations, so my thesis was on the question of Armenian self-determination after the First World War. And I was comparing Woodrow Wilson and Lenin's views about this issue. So anyway, but I also started making films. By the time we met, I was making my first feature. It was Next of Kin. I was casting for the parents. I'd already cast her part. Now that's what I remember. So and I went to Montreal to meet the Fazlians, Berge and Sirvart, to play the parents. And there was this gorgeous young woman who was in a Armenian production of The Mousetrap at the community center.
The Mousetrap?
The Mousetrap. She played
Agatha Christie?
Yeah, she played Mrs. Casewell.
Oh my God.
And I went to this rehearsal, and I just fell head over heels. Like this is the most beautiful young woman I'd ever seen, and she was Armenian. And I'd been looking for an Armenian princess, but like the complication was, as she will tell you, is she was married. So in case you don't know, but I wanted her to be in my movie, and I said very, to the woman who had been cast, I explained, well, she's Armenian because the woman who was cast was not Armenian. I explained how, and she got it. So that's how Arsinée entered my life, and we fell in love during the shooting of that movie, and it became really complicated because she was married. So when she takes over the story, just you keep in mind that I was coming from, I would say, the furthest you can be from the community and still identify as Armenian. So I came back into that kind of nexus, and she was raised in a very different way. Over to you.
Well, maybe I was raised in a more sort of common reality away, in as much as I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. So were my parents, who were children of survivors of the genocide on both sides. They came from my grandparents came from Dikranagerd through Syria, and then from Syria they came to Lebanon. So by the time I was born, they were obviously, except my maternal grandmother, all of them alive. So I grew up actually in that largest Armenian community of genocide survivors, which Lebanon was, with Syria, and I guess in Europe it was France, but Lebanon was the largest probably at that point. And by the time I was born, a lot of the infrastructure of the culture was already sort of quite advanced in terms of the community centers, in terms of the schools. We had so many Armenian schools, and then that life in Lebanon actually happened as if it was happening in a little Armenia. In my youth and in my sort of upbringing, I had very little contact with my host country, which was Arabic speaking, and which was composed of Christians and Muslims and other religious practices. Within the community, I just felt that I was living sort of a normal life, except that life was not normal. And I felt it on everyday basis as well, because the memories were alive and because the survivors were still around me. Unfortunately, I think that I didn't take a lot of advantage at the time to do the things that I think today I would have loved to do. And this is what I would love to talk about later on to all the filmmakers or all the artists who are watching this, is that it's very, very important to document our reality. So I think by the time I finished part of my schooling in Armenian, I went to Khanjian Gemaran at first, and then I went to the Armenian Catholic School of Hripsimyants. So in these both schools have been very, very fundamental in my upbringing in two respects. The Champalanjian Gemaran was the place where I really acquired every day, through breathing that environment of national identity, having these the teachers that were really versed into a sense of the mission that they had, which was transmit this interrupted culture in a more fluid way. However, that fluidity could have been sort of passed on. I mean, we had Akhpalyan and Levon Shant's actual statues in our schoolyard, and Simon Vratsian was alive and living in that building. So the atmosphere was the one of incredible power of survival, even though we learned also very strongly how to claim not only that identity in our everyday living, but also in terms of the justice that we had to work towards through education, through learning. I also had my mother very present in my upbringing, who was a very strong voice of that particular notion of providing justice to the culture, more than my father, who was also obviously very strong Armenian. But my mother had a clear mission that she did not accomplish in her life because of her circumstances, but really projected onto me. And this is how, for instance, I ended up doing my master's in political science later on, years later, in Canada. The second school was very important as well. It was, as I said, Hripsimyants, the Armenian Catholic congregation, and it was a wonderful also experience, because I learned two major things along with Armenian, because they were also very strong Armenian teachers, the nuns, and they really believed in their Armenian identity. But there was also an opening to France, for instance, and to Europe, but particularly France. So my scope opened up very clearly into this French culture, and then later on into Enlightenment, etc., etc. And the other thing, because it was a girls' school, I think it created some kind of questioning in my mind about the notion of being a woman and the function of woman in society, having the Armenian values, but also having these questions about what it means to be an educated woman. Of course, all this was interrupted, sadly, for the Armenian community as well as for Lebanon itself, or all of it, in 1975 when the civil war started, and we came to Canada at that point. We were established in Montreal, partly because my education was in French as a second language, but also because we had family early on. And there I came to realize the history of Quebec, the Quebec French-Canadian culture, who was going through a major sort of identity questioning, politically, socially, very actively, with a lot of history of, through sort of I guess almost militaristic forces to claim that geographic and cultural identity. And I started becoming incredibly obsessed about this notion of what it means to be Armenian in that context, and what does self-determination mean, and what does it mean to have a national quest. So it was later on in those years that I met Atom while I was doing, I had finished my bachelor degree, and I was doing theater because I had studied also theater, but that was not a pursuit that I could really consider taking seriously, because my parents and my immediate community would not perceive it as a justifiable career. Career meant something much more than that, than acting or being an artist. It meant being a doctor. It meant being a political figure. It meant being anything else that is considered today independent sort of practice or profession in that sense. So when I met Atom, he was 23 years old, and I was 25 years old, and I was doing, as he said, the mousetrap in Armenian with a wonderful lady who had come from Egypt. Her name is Selma Keklikian, and so we met in that context. What I would like to say to sum up at this point, which is after that, it's a bit of a history, because I did audition, got the part, as Adam said, and we fell in love, and the rest is history. But what is very important, and still it is an image in my mind that stays true, is that when we met, there was a circle, and inside that circle were our Armenian heritage, our Armenian culture, wherever we came from, our Armenian identity, stories, history. And just outside that thin line of the circle was the rest of the world. So we were both standing on that line of the circle, that thin line. And when we met, I was standing with my probably back towards the outside world and looking inside. And Atom was standing next to me, not too far in any case, looking to the outside world and not as much looking inside. But we were both on the same line. And what happened after we met, we started sort of changing our positions back and forth. And eventually we found ourselves just on that line, sometimes looking at each other, looking inside together, looking outside together. We just did that sort of
Well, that's the dance of your lives, it seems. I mean, it's fascinating to hear the actual history of your lives, which I think I and a lot of people have only been able to kind of guess at and infer. And there's no source for me for kind of trying to gain access to that aspect of your life than calendar, actually. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just play a little clip from calendar and talk a little bit about it.
It's a dwelling dating from the 15th century, at the same time as the church.
Does this mean anything to you?
The things he's saying?
No. The history behind the things he's saying.
Well, they're interesting stories.
Just interesting?
I guess.
What does it mean when you hear me tell you his stories?
What does it mean?
Yeah, it's practical, right?
What's practical?
My services as a translator.
I guess.
I mean, first of all, like, what a performance by Arsinée, navigating seamlessly. Like, you're not sure, is she full of contempt toward this guy behind the camera? Is she teasing him in good humor? I mean, it's really like a really remarkable performance.
Well, it's also particularly remarkable because it is a performance, right? You have to understand, when we went to make this film, I was full of nothing but joy and delight and excitement at everything I was seeing in this new country, literally new country. Like, we were shooting this in 1992. Had been there the year before when it was still a Soviet republic, and had been there like through this terrible time economically. Like, we were shooting this in the worst possible time. There was like no electricity a lot of the times, and it was war with Artsakh. We were very close to this. We could hear it, you know, like when we were at Noravank, we were like near that boundary, and so this was all happening, and I was like just full of this sense of anticipation of everything that was to come. Arsinée, as a person, was coming back to a place where it wasn't the dream place that she had imagined, she'd been told. So the character you're seeing in this frame you played, where someone very much at ease and playful, kittenish, if you will, that's not who she was. Like, it was a very tough shoot for her. And I, on the other hand, having no real preconception, like this image of Hayastan was not a golden place of dreams, and like it wasn't in my upbringing to think of it that way. And yet it felt that, like, when I was seeing these churches, like I was going, oh my God, this is my link to this artistic heritage. Like, these are amazing edifices, and I was just basking in that energy. So,
but it's funny you say that, because on the one hand, it seems you were really activated and inspired in a kind of very on the other hand, you were so conscious as a filmmaker to understand the position that you were in, and almost to understand the traps of idealism that you found yourself. I mean, the entire scene seems to be constructed to kind of temper exactly.
But that is where it's a written play. You know, it's not us. That film is not. We're not playing ourselves. I mean, and I think that's maybe the. You know, it's. I'm creating a character. He's cinematic. You know, the character. I'm. You know, he's there. He basically would never have gone to Armenia if he wasn't paid by the church to make these images for the calendar. He has no, and the last thing he expects is he's gonna lose his girlfriend over the course of this trip. You know, like, and I don't even know how long they've been together, this couple in the film. Like, you know, maybe they just found each other, like, you know, a few months before. We don't know, but it's not us. It's not us.
By the way, talk to me a little about that, which is like this thing of like, it's you, no, but it's really not you.
Yeah.
It's actually you going back to Armenia, but it's not.
Here's the thing about Armenia. I'm sure you know this. I wasn't supposed to play in the film. So I had another actor in mind. And one of the reasons why the advantages of being behind the camera was that I'd be able to come back, replace my dialogue with the actor I had, and then we'd play out these other scenes. But what happened was that as we were doing the dialogues in Armenia, our voices overlapped. So I technically could not cut myself out. So I actually had to play. I hate performing. I don't like acting. So, but I had to be in the movie as a result of this technical problem we had, which I could not extract my voice.
So I have a question that it's so clear already in Calendar and in so many of the films, that create your body of work, which is that whether it's you or not, it's still layer upon layer of consciousness of the situation, right? Of a reflection on the role of the seer and the scene and the actor and the director. Is that, I wonder, is that a sensibility that you developed and kind of applied to the Armenian stuff, the Armenian themes, or do you think there was something about being Armenian?
No, I'm very self-conscious as a person because I was raised I was raised in this place where I was a real outsider, and not only that, the community people around me who were predominantly English white, people, they thought of me as an Arab or as a Jew, maybe an Italian, but I was outside. Armenia did not figure into their sense of who I was, and I honestly wouldn't have had the means to explain to them at that point what an Armenian was. I mean, I came to that later on in my life. It wasn't instilled in me, even though it was my mother tongue. It was my Armenian sucks, like everyone knows, but it is my mother tongue. So I spoke it with my grandmother, which is the story of family viewing, about that link, because she was a very important link to me for a number of reasons. I won't go into them, but so I wanted to assimilate. My parents' project was for me to assimilate. So, but as a result of that, I'm very aware of the construct of identity. So that this is not something that is natural. It's something you affect.
Right.
So that is an odd artistic position. I'm not coming from a place that's integrated completely. So the Armenian, my take on my Armenian identity is very different from Arsinée's, very. And I would trace it also back to when I said at the very beginning, Egypt and Lebanon. So the Armenians in Egypt were always part of an island. They never really integrated themselves into Egyptian politics. So in Lebanon, as part of the constitution of Lebanon, Armenians were they had to be Armenian representation in the political makeup of Lebanon. And the Armenians were very active in that, so maybe Arsinée was saying she wasn't raised with Arabic language as much as, but a lot of Armenians were. I mean, a lot of Armenians have inherited that sense of ownership in Lebanon's political destiny in a way that the Armenians in Egypt never did.
Not a lot. Few have as an opportunity, but they did not the rest of the community. I mean, we were referred to as Armenians the moment we opened our mouths, because either we didn't speak, even my generation, so we're talking about third generation, even we didn't speak properly, or we had an accent while speaking even properly Arabic. But definitely, I mean, it's not that we didn't realize, or I didn't realize the otherness of myself, but that otherness was part of the infrastructure, the social infrastructure of the place. But when I came to Canada, for sure that sense of otherness got sort of amplified, especially in Quebec. I mean, so it doubled in its sort of volume.
Ferocity.
It's ferocity. Not ferocity. No, the volume of it, and I had to make something out of it. So, but because I was prepared in a way to confront that from my childhood as a mission in society to bring my identity forth, to bring my struggle forth. I was prepared to do it, not necessarily artistically, though I appreciated the artistic process for that, for sure. But I thought that it was something that had to be done socially and certainly politically. So I went on with that energy, and it didn't sort of confuse me, or I did not feel the kind of sort of self-consciousness. I felt that I was other, but I sort of was solid in my, for instance, in my career, few things happened. I didn't, for instance, want to change my name ever, which was something that was actually from different parts of society, not only from the artistic community, but it was proposed. Why don't you change your name? My previous generation has, as we know, in Europe, in the United States, but for me, it was just absolutely not a question to do something like that. So
and in my case, our name had already been changed at a certain point, so that when we came
simplified,
right? So it's not Egoyan, it's Egoyan, which is easier to say, and then this weird fluke with my first name, right? Which is it's Adom, and in Eastern Armenian that is conveniently Atom, but it is pronounced with a toe. I'm not using a dune, like very, very clearly. It's, so it's like so. But I want to say something else. For those people who are listening who are into the political history, let's remember when we talk about the Egyptian Armenians, after the genocide, when we went to the Paris Peace Conference, the two representatives that the Armenian people had were Nubar Pasha from Egypt, who was involved with kind of the Ottoman sort of rule, but had never been to Armenia. But, is this defining figure, and Tumanyan, right? So can we have more like a very interesting kind of two figures who are representing the aspirations of the Armenian state, one who is actually, you would still say Western Armenian, Tumanyan, right? He's not, but I don't even know who we might have had as a representative from what was then Eastern Armenia, right? So it's just so interesting when we look at how we make ourselves up and how we represent ourselves to others. It's still very much in flux, as we can tell over these past horrifying months. It's still being determined how we map out our sense of what we project to other people. We know amongst ourselves who we are. We have a clear sense of that and what the negotiations are, as complicated as they might be. But we do have this issue of how do we represent ourselves to the greater world outside?
Well, that's also an interesting artistic question, because one of the great ambassadors of a nation are artists, and the world comes to know us also through our films and our music and our literature.
Right.
Which is why this particular question from an audience member has been upvoted, and I think there are tons of questions flooding in, and I'll try to integrate them as casually as I can into my own line of questioning. But given the importance of, Atom and Arsinée become famous, Serj Tankian becomes famous, Charles Aznavour becomes famous, and suddenly, these guys are our idols, but we do nothing to encourage culture. Within our homes anyway. Arsinée, you were talking about the fact that even within your own setting, a pursuit of the life of the arts wasn't encouraged. We want our kids to enter steady careers to become doctors and lawyers. And it is a problem that many kind of young Armenians have, and it's maybe all people do actually, and maybe that's part of the answer. But Ani Minasyan's question, I'd kind of like to kind of throw that over to you and say, why is that, and should it be discouraged? And what strength did you find in yourself? What was it? Disobedience? How did you muster the courage in yourself to really dedicate yourself to the life of the arts?
Okay, here's the thing about that. Unlike being an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or an academic, the chances of you being successful as an artist are really slight. They're really, it's very tough. It's incredibly competitive. It's a bit like being a professional athlete, I guess. you hopefully have a longer lifespan than you would as an athlete, but maybe not. Maybe you're going to be like that flash in the pan, and you're going to have just maybe a 10-year career. Maybe you get to have but it's tough. In my case, I saw my parents, who both wanted to be artists. My father had his first one-man show when he was 16 in Cairo. He was written about, in all the papers. He was the first person from probably the Middle East, certainly from Egypt, who got a full scholarship to the Chicago Art Institute in the 50s. So he was there, in the 50s in Chicago, in the hub of it all, and he wanted to be famous more than anything else. He knew what that meant to be famous, and he didn't become famous. And my mother didn't become famous, and they had to struggle to make a livelihood. So I knew it was tough. They did not want their children to become artists, but we couldn't help it, sister and I. That's what we wanted to do. But in my case, I studied something else. I studied. In my case, I studied international relations. I wanted to become. I thought I would be a diplomat. That would be my calling. So I would do that work and still write plays. But at a certain point, as I was studying, I realized I really loved drama. I loved writing plays. I loved making these short films at the film club on campus, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, but also that is all sort of contextualized in the fact that you were living in a country like Canada, where those options of diverting your sort of interest was available. I think had I remained in Lebanon, there was no chance for me to ever explore, let alone practice, the idea of becoming an actor. Oh my God, it was, next to prostitution, that was the closest that came, especially for a woman. In Canada, that was different. But what I would say to a lot of young people who still have that issue, I'm not sure in all cultures. I think in more traditional cultures who come from this part of the world, meaning Canada, United States, maybe there are still going to be parents who would not consider the arts in general as a viable or desirable sort of practice. But I think generally being an artist is an accepted form of practice and sort of accomplishment in life. So for these young people, I would say the thing that I benefited from, I can very clearly say that, and I don't regret one moment of that journey, is that you can continue your pursuit as a doctor, as a lawyer. You can do those things, and then or all along, as Adam said, hone your practice as an artist. The thing that is required to be a famous artist is two things: perseverance, and three things. And the second one, or the first one even, is talent. You have to have talent more than in any other field. You can be a doctor who is not that talented. You can still finish your studies and practice. But with arts, you need talent, and you need also luck. Luck being circumstances, opportunities, acknowledging those opportunities. But perseverance is going to bring all this together. If you don't have it, you can't do it.
And that would also mean yearning, right? Like you have to yearn for what it is you want. You need to have a clear idea, in my case, of what it is the type of thing I'd like to make and where I'd like it to be seen. What am I aiming for? When do I know I've made it because it's being seen in the right place, So that's really important, I think, to have that image projection.
Are you talking like worked on a work-to-work basis? Or are you talking you have visions of your career or of your creative life beyond, at a longer stretch?
I'll give you an example. Okay, and this is where I date myself, because in my world, when I was starting in my early 20s, which is like early 80s, it was for the type of films I wanted to make, it was certain festivals, right? Like I dreamt that I would one day get to the Cannes Film Festival, because I saw that, like, in terms of or Venice, Berlin, I mean, but Locarno, like, these were the places when I saw the films I loved. They had little stickers at the front, like saying that that they won a prize in Cannes or Venice or Berlin, and I thought, okay, so that's the stamp of approval, you know. So
no, Atom, it's so refreshing to hear you say this, because I feel like most artists in your position would kind of give a cop-out answer, where the truth is that I think as a community of artists, we're all relating to the fact that it's something maybe so vain or so, superficial.
But I would also say that that's not the case anymore. Those festivals still exist, but honestly, you can't have that type of the career that they would have offered now, because it is about the streaming services. Like, let's make no mistake about that. It's about the Netflix and the Amazons, and and it's about aggregate scores, right? It's about algorithms, and it's about, so you still need visibility. You still need to be marketed. But for me, the way it would be, the marketing would be through the festivals. That would be right. So in the same way that, maybe Serge would say, like playing in Coachella or playing, or maybe, I don't know, like, it's interesting. Like, I was thinking, okay, so if you were an aspiring rock and roll star in the 60s, you'd look at the Beatles in Shea Stadium and say, I want to play in Shea Stadium. Now, it seems improbable, but you need to have that. Like, I guess if you were a young Greek playwright in, 300 BC, you'd go to Epidaurus and you'd, see these like massive civic, events and say, I want one of my plays to be presented there.
Well, you're saying something very interesting, but also extremely problematic. So I want to kind of force a follow-up answer, which is, you came in dreaming about the Cannes or Venice film festivals at a time when those places provided actually a launch pad, and in fact, the 90s, you took off from those places.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but what you're saying is that a lot of current filmmakers who are creating the kind of films and with the kind of ambitions, thinking that these kinds of places are offering similar opportunities, would be wise to kind of reconsider or to wise up about the fact that these festivals, that path has kind of shifted.
The thing that I never thought about until very recently was that, as prestigious as those festivals were, they were still about a platform for business, right? Like, the films were marketed based on getting into those festivals, maybe winning a prize at those festivals. And they're, like, small distributors from various, or bigger, medium-sized distributors would buy the films at the festivals, in the same way that, you would go to a certain type of gallery or a certain label or something that offers you the prestige that then means that it becomes something people need to address. That has shifted, because for good and bad, it means that there's not that same level of curatorship, right? Things are not being curated by a select few, like the festival programmers. But it is, I would say, by the people who commission for Netflix or Amazon or the buyers. And then the question is, like, it's not just enough. And I've seen this with my films, my older films, which are now, on Netflix or Criterion. It's like, well, then what? Like, how do you create this kind of like eyeballs going to those things? And it comes back to this question of marketing. So what happens now if you're an actor or a writer and a director is that before you get those contracts, people look at your social media following, so they have a sense already of what sort of how many eyeballs you would attract. In that world, I would not be able to operate. So I wasn't conditioned in that space. But for a young artist needs to be aware that at all times, like, how are you presenting yourself, and how do you create leverage?
You're leaving out something incredibly important in this conversation, which is a predecessor of everything you're saying. Everything you're saying, and that's an infrastructure in your own country that supports. It doesn't matter how small in a way at the beginning, but supports the actual making of the arts. And if we're going to talk about Armenia, we have a major issue because we don't have that infrastructure. So you benefited first and foremost by Canadian, come to the picture, you benefited first and foremost from the infrastructure that existed through the arts councils. Yes, but I mean, Next of Kin was made with $36,000. $36,000 Canadian.
No family money, right? Like we're not coming from a place where.
No. Okay, so there was no other money than that kind of government-based funding. Family viewing the same way. Yes, you got then a little bit here and there. So by the time you got recognized through Berlin Forum, etc., you started getting, maybe not even, your producers were Canadian. You were yourself your producer, but you can produce because there was that availability in the country. So if we're going to talk about the audience that we have here, we have to speak about the reality that you guys, I'm not seeing you, but I can imagine there are many women and many young men and many young women who are there. You are functioning in a very particular reality where you don't have serious state or government support. And if some countries, it's not state, they have other ways of maybe private, but I don't know any country actually that has successful community of filmmakers who doesn't have I don't know, you can correct me on this, but you have to have that support. So what happens to a whole generation of you who have the ambition, who have the talent, who have the perseverance, but not what I said, the luck, which is that opportunity I'm talking about. Where do you find that, and how do you find that?
Right, and I mean, we hope Creative Armenia becomes part of that solution. We hope there are other cultural structures that take shape and take this seriously. Yeah, and in the meantime, back to what you were saying, which is perseverance. I've been so inspired recently, and we've been supporting almost a dozen just film projects that are the result of Armenian women or men picking up their cameras and heading to Artsakh during the war.
Absolutely.
And that is what needs, to be done every step of the way, recognizing that opportunity and jumping in to be a part of the history and telling the history. And that's exactly the kind of, when we see artists taking that step, we do everything to try to meet them there. Without that step, we're invisible to each other.
Exactly. I mean, this is why, like, the moment you came up with this idea of Creative Armenia, like, we went, okay, that's it. Like, that's what we need. Because what we saw when we were in Armenia, like, we were very involved with the Golden Apricot in the early days. So we had these, meetings, and we still saw, like, most of the film resources were being funneled into these very large scale productions. And I remember having a meeting at the highest level, like 10 years, maybe 12 years ago, saying, it makes so much more sense to put these into smaller projects, like to really create a portfolio. Look at what happened in Romania. Look at what happened in these places where it's we're not putting all our eggs in one or two baskets, because it's not
the technology.
It's not. Yeah, Arsinée was talking about Next of Kin being shot on 36,000, Calendar being shot on less than 100,000. It'd be made for even less now because of digital technology.
Right.
All that money was just put into film. So that I think that this is the first hurdle shouldn't be actually getting access to a small grant. It should be the way it's structured, that there are these seed grants, as you were talking about at the beginning, that Creative Armenia is offering, just to kind of show that because what I was saying before. Arsinée is absolutely right. I mean, I saw the festivals, but the only way I was going to make a film that got into those festivals was if I got a grant, because God knows, there was no other way of funding it. I had no money. My parents weren't going to pay. I didn't have access to any other money. And if I didn't get the grant, I wouldn't make those films. Like Family
Right.
Viewing didn't get a grant. I had to wait 6 months so I could reapply. You know, like so it's
and
that's the
your
other
own
thing.
Armenian community here
Oh yeah.
did not pay a penny, even though
Yeah.
they all expected for
Yeah.
us, for you to make your real film, which meant
Oh, I
real-
love this topic. Okay, now that we're among artists here, let's start gossiping about this kind of stuff, which is ingratitude, which is this feeling. Let's really talk about this, but let's also talk about it through what's for me an extremely important movie in my own upbringing, and one that I've been very inspired by, which is Ararat. You know, a few days ago at our first panel, on day one of Creative Armenia Week, the moderator, my creative partner Alec, asked Eric Bogosian, like, what was the moment where, you know, Eric Bogosian, icon of the 80s in New York, taking Broadway by storm, Pulitzer, you know, all that stuff. And at what point did he experience this kind of Armenian activation or Armenian kind of reawakening? And literally what he answered was the set of Ararat. And he literally answered, like, when I saw that the Von scene kind of recreated, that is when it first, like, the scope and the hugeness of what had occurred to us landed. And it was a particularly moving moment to hear him, like, pinpoint that film. And having said that, I do want to play one little clip from Ararat before I pursue the question.
What you can do, okay? Just let me know. Okay, I gotta get off. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Okay, bye. Sorry, I had a call.
Ruben, Annie's confused about the mountain, Ararat. She has noticed quite correctly that it would not be seen from Von.
Well, we thought we could stretch things a bit. I mean, it's such an identifiable symbol, and given the moment in history that we're trying to show,
So it's something you could justify?
Sure, poetic license.
Where do you get those?
Wherever you can.
So a couple things here. First of all, let me do a little film criticism here before I get to the question. But first, like, okay, this is how you tell a great filmmaker is working, right? Any director less than this is like, the scene ends with Arsinée saying, you know, like, where do you get a poetic license? Like, you know, Eric loses and Arsinée looks profoundly in the distance. But no, like, we're going to pursue this. Eric gets to say something extremely valid here, because that you wherever you can, you do have to get a poetic license wherever you can. And so we, you know, part of, like, this insistence of not stopping at the easy glance and the easy way out, Atom, and really honing in on the truth is something. As a teenager, I was going to high school in Los Angeles, and just kind of beginning to chart out my own career and my own creative ambitions, and being in those halls, those movie halls that year in LA, where the first big, you know, Armenian genocide film was on the screen, and it explored in its many artistic levels, was like a profound experience for me. But I don't want to make this all about, like, glorifying. I want to get to the opposite point, actually. I want to get to, like, okay, lights go on, and then I'm like this inspired kid, and then sure enough, you hear groans, right? You hear, like, these Armenian groans immediately. What they're saying isn't, oh, like, here's a movie we absolutely didn't deserve. Here's a guy who put together the financing, wrote a script, brought world-class actors together, and gave a sincere and layered meditation. What they're you know, they're like grumble like a disappointed. I mean, of course, like, many people loved it, and there were people on both sides. But how did you navigate that? Like, how do you psychologically navigate this thing that as artists all of us face? Which is, we put our heart and soul in something. There's even this Armenian cause thing attached. We even believe that, like, we left the comfort of our obscure psychological or sexual or obscure artistic interest, and we actually delivered on a national cause. and now people are ungrateful. People, like, how do you deal with that? I think it's important to address like the troubles in addition to the glory days of
Well, I
Canada.
mean, honestly, I'll be honest with you, rage. Like, I was enraged because it felt like, okay, like I was just reading today, like next edition of the Canadian Journal for Film Studies, the cover is Ararat 20 years later. And it's like, these are Canadian, film, and it's about, this film that deals with these extraordinary complex issues. And they've won approval of stills. And I'm going, wow, like, I wish I felt this way 20 years ago, because I felt nothing but confusion and rage at the response from my own community, especially the intellectual community. In France, there were some very well-known French Armenian intellectuals who were so dismissive. And I thought, wow, I mean, if this isn't something for them to address, I mean, a film where you have Siamanto, who's quoted, who's doing a poem about a German woman observing a moment of extreme trauma, relating it to Siamanto, who writes it into a poem, which is then made into a film, which is then being related by this young man to a customs agent. If the levels of how transmission is playing, which I put so much effort into crafting that and trying to tell that, if an intellectual whose whole life is devoted to this dismisses the movie, then I'm fucked. Like, I mean, I can't, I'm sorry. Like, I mean, I can go back, I can enrage myself, because I lost friendships over this, because people who I knew, who I courted, who I thought were smart, were so stupid about what their responsibility was. Not to like the movie, by no means. But
to take it seriously.
Take it seriously. Like,
analyze
like
it.
These types of things don't come up very often. You don't have a work that embodies all these different strands of what the Armenian cultural monument might be, as flawed as it is. So that was very lonely, really lonely period. And also, the Turkish vitriol. And in the midst of all of this rage, I had to deal with the people who liked the film and or the people who felt like the Turkish side was all about, this is an Armenian propaganda effort. Like, you saw the thing that I held up in the documentary, Intent to Destroy. I mean, I don't know, for those of you who saw it, there was a massive Turkish propaganda campaign saying that this was something that was sponsored by the Armenian community to get into Cannes so that I could have a political platform. And I wanted to yell, there's not one Armenian dollar in this. And not only that, there's like this response, so it's strange, right? I wish I could say I was cool, it was okay, but I wasn't. I mean, it was very, very tough. And
let alone the physical threats that we got.
Not from Armenians.
Not from Armenians, obviously, but we didn't have any sense of protection from our community in terms of that support, so that we feel that we're at least in a warm place where we knew that we did the right thing. It was like this feeling that we did something. After all these years, you make the real film, and this is what you end up with. But you know what? There is something to be said there. I don't think there would have been, or there has been, any one film that could have encompassed everything that every Armenian, however million we are, would have in their minds of what that film should be. And should you make that film thinking that you are at least satisfying one person's projection, that one person is going to be maybe the same way I was so disappointed when I came to Armenia the first time, because I imagined it, this place of perfection of my soul and my spirit, that it's not going to happen. So that person is not going to have it.
I have to say one thing, though, in terms of all of this, and this is, again, how strange we are as a people. I'm talking about the diasporan response. Where I did feel welcome was in Hayastan. When the film was shown in Hayastan, when it was shown in Yerevan, I felt that it found some sort of a home, just because they were people in Hayastan were so appreciative that someone from diaspora had made the movie.
Right.
So that
Right.
really was a huge moment of linkage, more than with calendar, right? I think like a lot of Armenians in Armenia, they appreciated calendar, but it didn't have the same effect as that Ararat had. So
Right.
that was. So I'm talking about the our little our neurotically inspired communities in diaspora, but I think there was this real sense of communion with how the film was received there. So
it's an interesting. It brings us to an interesting point though, which is like it's really difficult. You realize, and I realized making with Alec 1915, a film which was very much inspired by Ararat. You were the first person to actually read the script, Atom, and like your encouragement of what is ultimately a very flawed but very sincere and ambitious kind of attempt meant the world, to us. And we kind of put that cross on our backs and marched into those halls and got a lot of those reactions. And it sort of began to dawn on us that from the questions that we ask ourselves as Armenians, it's almost like we are unable to watch a film directly. We're always watching a film with a constant analysis of how someone else is going to watch the film. And it's almost like we're, what's the person next to me thinking? Is it, how is this a representation of so and so? And in the endless like what if games we play with ourselves or we dramatize in our conversations, like what would have happened if Ararat came after The Promise? Like what would have happened if another film had lifted the burden of expectations of being like, okay, the classic epic Dr. Zhivago style or Schindler's List style Armenian story? Would that have created space for Ararat to have breathed better within the Armenian community? I mean, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is like, fuck everyone and fuck the critics. And like, we are artists. And part of what we do is to bring to life the most sincere and most personal and most truthful way of how we know how to approach a certain.
I mean, funny you should talk about the scene with Eric. When Arsinée says, "Where do you get the poetic licenses?" Part of what you observed, which is that we continue the scene. It's very important to see what Eric then does, which is that he has to perform. He then he grabs the book and he recalls what happened in Van as the music swells up, and we are understanding that his response is that he has to show why he's earned a poetic license himself.
Interesting.
And the only way he can do that is by performing that role. And that is a very telling moment, I think, where we are aware of this performative aspect of we need to be strong as artists because we are going to deal with a ton of rejection. We're going to deal with a lot of loneliness. We're going to deal with a lot of a sense of failure. But to continue, we have to keep being able to understand that we need to generate this excitement within ourselves as to what we're doing and why we're doing it, and craving this sense that somebody will understand it and embrace it, but it may not be in its time. So
and that requires a lot of self-confidence, and it requires a lot of belief in the importance of what you are doing, because as I said earlier, you don't need all of these things that Adam just mentioned about what makes you do it if you're going to become a doctor. You definitely don't. So this sense of being alone, even though you're not creating it alone, is something that is also a privilege, because it gives you the scope of exploration of what it is that you want to say. But you have to have something clear in your mind, or as you go through it, to be clear in terms of why you want to do it, how you want to do it, and eventually what you expect from it, but not necessarily right away. So immediate fame and recognition is not a reality.
Yeah, well, no, that's the big thing. Again, difference from the 80s. So the thing that people don't understand about our career is it's incremental,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like this first. I mean, you can see if you can see all these early films on Criterion now, which is or so like From Next of Kin, Family Viewing, Speaking Parts. Most people think the first feature is Exotica. It's number 6, and it costs like 1.5 million, and everything below that kind of is gradated down. So there was this opportunity to put something out there, see what the audience is, and step it up a little. But the problem now, because of, I mean, the downside of this democratization of distribution is that it is possible to have access to a huge audience like right off the bat, because it's available to you. There's no gatekeeper. But I'm not sure like how you plan this idea of the long term when you're dealing with this need for immediate massive acceptance to identify yourself. It's outside of my I can offer no advice to that, because I didn't experience that. I knew that it would be a long road. So I didn't have my breakthrough till like, mid 30s, right? And before that, it's like just sticking at it and keep going. And Arsiné's absolutely right. There was this government support, but I always at a certain point you need to also show that there is a market support. Like, it's not like the grant. When you're making your first films, the grant covers everything. But when you get past a certain point, you do need to have distributor support. You need to have commercial support to get access to the other stuff. Much like an American movie, to get the tax credits and to get all that soft money, there has to be some core money involved. But that's where a government, or like Armenia now being part of Eurimage, we all know that access is there, but you still need like the 200,000 euros from your host country, right? I mean, or something has to come from Armenia before you can access those other money.
Right.
And so that's the challenge.
Right. No, it's so interesting to hear you. Once someone makes it and becomes famous, you go back and look at the Wikipedia entries, and it's like, oh, this guy's been making movies since such and such year, and he had like at the age of 20 something. But that's not how it is. Like, history has a way of re-narrating all that stuff once you do make it. So, but how about now? Like, I think the perception is, and I'm expecting you to correct it. Kind of is like, okay, you made it, Atom. You made it, Arsinée. You must be swimming in money. It must be super easy for you to be making films right now. It must be like you've won Cannes several times, like all this stuff. Is that true, or do you have to hustle? Like, what does your hustling look like?
Okay. Well, here's the difference.
No, I'm going to tell you how it works. Every time he's making his film, until the recent one, Guest of Honor, he says to me, "This is the last time I'm making a film. I'm having it produced. I'm tired of having to raise the money. I'm not going to do it anymore." But I've heard this for the last 10 years. And it hasn't been the last time. But this is indicative of how difficult it is, even for Adam Egoyan, if we're talking about the success of Adam Egoyan, to raise those funds to do a personal film.
A personal film, right? So I can accept a gig where like a Chloe or something like that, where I'm working as a director for hire, and I'm grateful for those opportunities when it's material I think I would be good at. Like, some of the stuff I get offered, I know I'm not the right person for it. And I think that's been shown, like there's some films where I've done for hire, which I probably wasn't the right person. But for my own personal work that I write and direct, it's always challenging, because that market has become really small. Like, so, and if I go to Netflix, there's a ton of involvement. So these things that we're talking about, like the scenes of poetic license, and we should end the scene there, or we should, I can't work that way. I need to have control. So I'm very happy when I'm writing. I mean, I've written a lot of scripts, and there's one project that I think I can maybe get off the ground because it might be viable. But I'm also doing a lot of opera stuff and a lot of work in other fields, and films cost a lot of money. But like, I'm very happy, I've had this since I was like 13 years old, you know, and I try and play every day, and I'm very happy when I'm playing, and I'm very happy when I'm writing and reading.
Say something.
But I think that you need to have access to what it is that makes you happy as an artist. Like, what is it that actually allows you to practice what you do? So, because while you're waiting for the money or the support, you need to know how you're still expressing yourself. That's such an important part of what it means. And if you're totally waiting for other people to give you approval to express yourself, then, you know, and a way what I'm jealous of, like with people like, you know, who are songwriters like Serge or writers, is that they can do what they need to do on their own terms. They can go into a studio and just do it. But if you're an actor or a filmmaker or an opera director, you need that, you know, like it's quite a bit of support. So, like, you know, who I'm mentoring Artur in New York, and I sort of see, you know, like, yeah, that he's waiting for those breaks and those chances, and they're rare, and Arsiné's right, you need luck, but while you're waiting for it, you need to find something that gives you pleasure. It's so important to find joy in your talent. It's so important. Like,
and do you have it? Do you have it in writing? Do you actually enjoy the because writing is also hell, but is I mean, for me anyway. Are you really joyful in the process of writing, or just in the fulfillment of having written something that you?
Well, I find it funny you should say that, Garin, because I mean, I think you wrote an excellent like in terms of, you know, what's now called autofiction. I mean, you wrote like this really beautiful work of autofiction talking about your family. I can't write that way. If I could, I'd be writing that, you know. So you are a very good writer, and it's quite fluid for you. But I do write scripts. I do have, and they're basically blueprints for ideas. You know, I can't say I really enjoy writing prose the way that you might, or you might find it very difficult, but there's a fluidity in your writing of prose. There's people I like, you know, this Norwegian writer Knausgaard, who I think is like, you know, Karl Knausgaard, like, who writes these thick books which are autofiction, basically what you're doing, but they're just incredibly well written. So I get inspiration by that, and I go, I can do that, but I can't. It's not my gift. But I do enjoy, I know it sounds feeble and ridiculous, but I do enjoy playing guitar, making sounds on the guitar, luxuriating in the notes. I do enjoy coming up with these ideas on a day-to-day basis. I like playing around with things that I have control over, even if no one sees them. You know, like they're just things.
At this point of your life, you know, let's go back to that beginning process. And the beginning process was very, very applied pursuit of stages of what needed to be the final goal. So
yeah, that's true. I mean,
yeah, but we're not talking about this point. Coming to the camera, if you will. We're not talking at this. I mean, if we are talking again to young filmmakers, before they get to the let's say privileged place that we are now, where we can also be picking and choosing and focusing on things other than the work itself. What I would have to say is that if you have the time and you have to luxuriate yourself in something helpful and joyful, is watch and learn. Not only at school, if you're going to university to get a degree, but watch the history of cinema and watch like what has happened before you in so many different cultures, and not just your geographic environment of what let's say Georgian cinema has been, or what Russian cinema has been. And I have all the admiration towards these two cultures' output, but there is a whole history of cinema that comes also from India and you know, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and yeah, all of these places. So if you have that free time and you want to do something enjoyable, make it enjoyable by learning. And then realize that we don't have even though I am obviously someone incredibly politicized in my worldview, and any opportunity that has come up in my artistic work, I have gently or less gently sort of channeled into the political stuff. There are other stories than Artsakh, and there are other stories than the genocide that you can tell by just looking around you, your neighbor's life, or observing something that happens. You know.
Arsinée, let me come in, because you're raising a very important point, and I don't want to miss it. You know, being both like a creative person and also on the other side of it with Creative Armenia, being someone who takes part in the process of supporting other artists, you know, I have this window into what kind of projects Armenian creators are creating in film and music. And I'm not involved in much of the selection, but I do follow a lot of the applications that come in. And so much of it is about the things that you're mentioning. It is about the genocide. It is about the transmission of trauma. It is about Artsakh. And you have found quite a remarkable way of being able to address those things and then come out of them and then indulge some of your more purely artistic interest or psychological curiosities and then return to those issues. What do you like? What is your honest view of this thing, right? Like, on the one hand, yes, artists, let's just talk straight. Like, we have the responsibility to our nation and to the, you know. And then on the other hand, like, do we get to be artists at the end of this? Like, what is your honest feeling about the fact that 80% of the applications that we receive and like the movies I end up making aren't actually the movies that I may have had like childhood dreams to make. The movies that I end up making, I'm making a Qarabağ film right now. You know, we're kind of, and so is this what we're supposed to be doing? Or is this a trap to beware? Like, this is a really big question that I think haunts a lot of us as artists.
Yeah, well, if we're talking about us, look at our, just the one thing that I would say, it's coming to the camera, the one thing that is timeless about what we did, or Atom did specifically, and I am a witness to that, so I'll tell you that, is that he didn't do his genocide or denial of genocide film until he was established. So this is for the record, let me put it very clearly. As the Armenian community was expecting him to make his real film, which was the Armenian genocide film, that's what they meant. Every time they saw the previous, how many films? Seven? The previous seven or eight films, it was, and when are you making your, I mean, instead of commenting about what they saw, they would say, when are you making your real film? So, and when that moment happened, that he wasn't necessarily thinking of making it at that point, but the opportunity that I was talking about, that luck came up when Robert Lantos, the Armenian Community Center, receiving his award for his film and for having supported, obviously, Canadian filmmakers, including Adam's films as a producer. He went on the podium and said, and now I pass on the torch to make a film about your own people. So Adam was put in front of this possibility where a producer was saying to him, I'm going to fund all your film. And here was a Canadian, Hungarian, Jewish man who was a producer and saying, I will fund your film fully, in front of the Armenian community of 500 people. And Adam was being passed on the torch, which he could not turn down, right? So he made his film at that point because the opportunity and the luck happened. And he had been working again and again on different scripts, not ever happy with what he had in mind. So he didn't do it until he was sure that there was the opportunity, and finally he can make that script work for him. So what I'm saying is the following: make the films that you need to make for yourself. Make the films that you think is going to make you unique from the other if you accomplish that work. And hopefully, with perseverance and your own talent, you will be recognized for the quality of what you made. Make 1, 2, 3, 4, and then go to Artsakh and do your Artsakh story, if it's Artsakh that is important politically. I certainly...
Yeah, but that's a luxury. I'm sorry. Artsakh is happening now. You can't wait for Artsakh. You know, like you can't...
Listen, there are going to be always documentary filmmakers who are going to
but
want to make the Artsakh film. But I'm saying not everyone is going to have that obsession, and it's an obligation. You cannot make it an obligation. You didn't do it.
No, but if there is a challenge there, you have to grab it. Like you can't just wait.
If you can't say it, if you're not talented to say it, why would you do that?
I don't think an artist can make that choice. I'm sorry. Like my feeling is the artist cannot tell if they are ready for something. It's like you are blinded by this need.
You just throw yourself away. No, I don't think so. No, you never do that.
So here's what I would say.
I never did that.
I'm just going to say something, which is I think really important. And I'm going back to what I was saying before. As an artist, you need to find an activity which every day replenishes you. So you need to, and for me, it's a physical thing. So I think as an actor, there are exercises you do. There are things that you can do every day to remind yourself and connect yourself to your instrument. So if your instrument is your body, you have to be connected to your body. You have to know how your body works. If it's your mind, you have to be able to know how your own mind functions and what gives it a sense of replenishing its spirit, right? So reading is important, watching other films, but I would also say there has to be some activity. So, and you have to create a mythology around that, the process of writing, the process of assembling things, putting them together physically. There has to be a physical thing that you do that makes you happy, because to fight those battles, you need to have some ammunition, and that ammunition comes from inside you. So the question is, how do you replenish that? So Arsinée just whispered in my ear, that's old fart. But I actually think it's, there's a bit of new agey stuff. I'm from the West Coast of Canada. I'm a West Coast sort of person. But I do think that there's something to be actually very clearly identified.
Atom, you're talking at the point of your life where you see one person.
Is what I feel in my own life.
No,
I was writing. I was like doing these.
You were playing guitar because you thought you would have a career in guitar until you realized that film.
But I think part of, correct me if I'm wrong, Atom, I think like part of what you're saying, look, as artists living now, especially now, or beginning careers or entering careers now, it really is difficult to create art in the moment, to live in the moment of your art. Mm-hmm. You're driven so much toward the future of what you're going to produce. You're endlessly driven to the social media that you have to post on and which you need followings for. You're driven into all these aspects that I think, Atom, you are tapping into. I mean, you are addressing something that I feel in my daily life. It's a constant struggle, even when I'm doing the thing that I've been called to do, which is to write, to pause and say, I'm supposed to be enjoying this. I am in the process of creating a world, a sacred, beautiful moment. Yeah. I'm an artist and I'm engaged in this act. Whereas most of the time, if I just go into it by default, I'm in this like, I'm still connected to the world. I have 1,000 things happening. I'm full of ambition and dreaming of like what this movie is going to become and what festival it's going to get into. And it is difficult to create the space in which you feel yourself to be an artist. And I think you're both right, but I definitely do think that creating that moment is a constant struggle, and it's very fulfilling when you have that moment at the end of the day, which is like you did something special. It doesn't matter whether you get into that festival. Of course, it matters, but for the moment, you feel fulfilled in that you're realizing your destiny as an artist and as a human. How sentimental and ridiculous did that sound? But I said those.
No, but for that feeling to happen is that you have to believe that you are tackling whatever subject or story it is that speaks to you. So what I'm saying, no, you don't have to rush to that stuff and make because that's happening right now. You're not gonna do that You have never done that. I have never done that. I kept it in my mind. I have sort of enriched it with thought and whatever it needed. But I have ended up doing things that I know at that moment is important for me. It doesn't mean that Artsakh is not important. And there are going to be other filmmakers or other writers who are going to be interested in Artsakh because that is really closest to them, and let those people really be encouraged and supported to do that. But not everyone is going to rush to Artsakh because Artsakh is happening right now. But maybe there is a story in that about that humanity that is being challenged in Artsakh, that is also a reality in our immediate environment that another filmmaker can explore. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that be cynical and just go like, oh my God, what is to be an artist and suffer. What I'm saying is find the joy, but find the joy in your conviction of what you need to do right now, given all the challenges and all the frustrations, because at the end of the day, you will be accountable to yourself. That's all. It's
but so much as to say, if you are a young filmmaker and you feel that connection to go to a battlefield or to go to anywhere you want, and that is what is burning inside of you, then don't stop yourself. I mean, like.
But who's saying you should?
No one is saying. If you start analyzing whether or not you're in the right place in your career.
You don't analyze. Either you go because you feel that you have to, or if you don't feel that you have to, but you're still incredibly tortured and whatever, that's okay. Don't go. It's like you don't have to go because something is torturing you. You have to go because you have to be there. Tortured or not, you have to be somewhere in any case because you need to be there. So it's like there should be no guilt about not tackling something that is happening next door. It's not exactly where you feel you can do service. So you can be still, I mean, how many million how many hundreds of artists or filmmakers in the diaspora have been completely pulling their hairs and like going nuts about what's going on. Not everyone is rushing to Artsakh. They can.
But Arsinée, you and I think that's important.
We didn't hear, you got interrupted.
I'm saying, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, but an important part of your point was that you shouldn't have guilt.
Yeah.
And what I infer from that is that you shouldn't necessarily be led by perceived obligations.
Absolutely.
Toward your nationality or toward your country, or you should be led to the place where your heart or your mind or your artistic instinct are taking you. And if that happens to be a battlefield, that's great.
Perfect.
And if that happens to be an intimate conversation between a man and a woman in a cafe, go there. I think it's the guilt. I think it's the guilt and the responsibility that a lot of Armenians are processing, because as human beings and as we're called to be such political human beings, especially at a time like this, when literally we've been hearing military jets fly over our sky during the course of our conversation. And we're called as human, and it's very difficult in these times with such live issues as Artsakh, with such ongoing issues as genocide, to kind of separate yourself from that and say, okay, those are my issues as a citizen, as a human. But like, I grew up loving Agatha Christie. I grew up loving David Lynch. I grew up loving Egoyan. And like, there are issues here. There are things here that are mine, and that we all feel like, when are we going to get to these issues? So anyway, I don't know that this has an answer.
I think the challenge as an artist is that you also need to be aware of those issues, because the challenge is that your antenna does have to be up there, right? So you have to feel wherever it is you've chosen to live, or whether or not wherever fate has made you live, you need to locate yourself within that place. So those are very real issues. And in the case of Armenia, if you're a young artist, you're also, and if you're going to be called to battle, you have military service, and so those are very real things, and it becomes part of your makeup. So I'm just saying, in the midst of all of that, I'm just giving advice. I mean, from my own personal experience, that that there needs to be something where you can put that aside for a moment in some way. Not all the time. Some days you can't. You can't when there's military jets flying over you. That's going to break any sort of space. But where you are able to, as I say, just replenish somehow. And in the case, I mean, of being in Armenia, you have this incredible physical connection to a heritage, which does replenish itself. That's part of why this land is important to us. Why are we fighting for this? Because this land and the churches, I mean, it breaks my heart. It makes me so outraged when I look at what happened to the structures in Artsakh. It's like it's torture for us. It's torture. So how do we respond to these things, but to understand that a part of our limbs are being taken away? So there is, we know we need to address that, but it's also a physical thing that we're connected to, and it replenishes us anyhow. In diaspora, it's different because we're not dealing with that physical thing, except for those of us who have been there, like us, and we know what those places are. You're living with that every day. Yeah.
Well, you know, I've completely abused my promises to you.
If you're tortured. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was apologizing to you and to our community of artists for completely hijacking this interrogation today. Like, we had so many good questions from a wonderful writer, Dana Wollrath, and Inga, and I hope that I integrated some of your questions into this conversation. I just want to end by remembering like where this all began, Autumn and Arsinée. You know, I wrote a book, as you said, in 2010, and I found like this generic office address for you, and I sent you this book, Autumn, and then a few weeks later you wrote this beautiful handwritten note, and I got it in the mail, and I still keep it very close to me, and it's a very important thing to me. And then some months later, I was in Toronto for a reading, and Arsinée Khanjian is sitting right there in the audience listening to me read, and to realize that you're not only such masters of what you do and such profound artists, but you're also good people and conscientious Armenians was so inspiring and so revealing to me. And it's that act, it's the act of writing that note, which is kind of the essence of Creative Armenia. Those are the elements of my life that have inspired me to pursue my own creations, but also to take part in creating structures which send those notes and sometimes checks and sometimes connections to mentors and sometimes access to industry connections, but always that forward motion, always the act of writing that letter, always the act of encouragement, always the motivation to keep going and to keep building and to keep creating.
But it began with your bravery got in to write your book, right? I'm inspired by what you offered. Right. So I'm responding as an artist because I appreciate what you have done to commit yourself to writing that book and to sharing it and making yourself very vulnerable. So that's really it actually doesn't start with my response. It starts with your creative act, and your bravery, and your sense of being able to look at yourself and find a way to express that to the world.
Well, thank you, Autumn, and I take that not only as like a words, you know, a compliment to me, but kind of just words of advice to all artists, which is that you're right. That is the first step. You put yourself on the line. You start doing what you're supposed to be doing. You insist on your narrative. You insist on the pattern of creation that you've chosen for yourself. And if you insist enough, people will follow, because there's nothing more attractive in the world than someone who has passion, than someone who believes in what, like, that is the most powerful, the most transfixing, the most attractive thing in the world, which is when we encounter people whether they're political heroes or whether they're artists who have found a track in their life that they're pursuing. You are such people. You are endlessly inspiring to us. Ararat is a profound film, and I advise anybody who thinks otherwise to keep watching it until they figure it out. And you are right, Atom, and you are right, Arsinée. And thank you for being true artists, sincere artists, and great Armenians, and being such an integral part of Creative Armenia. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And please go on with whatever is inspiring you right now. You feel you need to talk about. You need to do it. Do it with conviction, and perseverance. Perseverance is a great quality to have. Don't give up. Surround yourself with people who can believe in you. It doesn't matter how few they are, but as long as they can give you that. Creative Armenia, I am very proud to be part of that, maybe more remote, still very sort of convinced supporter of the initiative. Darin had that initiative, and thank you for bringing it out of Armenia and not into Armenia necessarily. And that is a wonderful also privilege to have. So we have small opportunities. You, by using it and being part of it, you can make it bigger. So do that. Do whatever is close to your heart, and whatever you can teach yourself in terms of exploring, researching, and always continue learning. Never stops. I know that this is the most common thing you've heard, but now that I'm 62 years old and I reacted against that perhaps early on, I can say that by learning, I made my next step possible. So the moment you stop doing that, you're just gonna go sort of floating in the same place. So you're never too old to learn. You can also teach at the same time, no problem with that, but keep learning from anyone you can.
Thank you so much, Arsinée. Thank you, Atom. Good afternoon in Toronto. Good night in Yerevan. Please follow Creative Armenia Week. We have 2 more great days, 2 more wonderful panels coming up, lifting the curtain tomorrow and breaking into Hollywood on Friday. Thank you for being part of our creative community, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Share party.
Share party.